Welcome to another edition of the Ronin Leadership Podcast. Well, good afternoon, and welcome to another edition of the Ronin Leadership Podcast. This is Mike Howard. I'm your host and the author of The Art of Ronin Leadership. And I'm really enjoying doing these podcasts, and I hope those of you who are subscribing to the podcast are getting a lot out of it too. It's Tuesday afternoon in Las Vegas, Summerlin area to be exact. And we actually have a fairly cloudy day today, but unlike back where I was in Seattle, the rain really doesn't last long. You get a little bit of a trickle and then it kind of dries up. But it's been a good day. My wife Janice and I did our usual workout at our F45 studio and just finished lunch, and so I'm here doing another podcast. One thing I want to remind all of you is that our podcast is really on a lot of different platforms. You can find it on YouTube, on Spotify, on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, and you can actually find it also on my website, MikeHowardAuthor.com. So please take a look at the podcast that we're trying to pump out at least one a week, and we'll have some guests, as I said in some previous podcasts, eventually here or virtually, that we'll be able to add a different flavor to our podcasts. But please, you can find the podcasts anywhere. So please, number one, subscribe. Click that subscribe button that you see on the screen, and then number two, please give us some feedback on what you think about the content, the things you like about it, but the things also that you don't like about it. And then that way we can always refine and improve our podcast content. I'm wearing my Get After It t-shirt today. One of the podcasts that I follow is by a retired Navy SEAL named Jocko Willink. I'm sure a lot of you have heard of him. He does Jocko podcast, and a lot of it is on leadership and some of it's on physical fitness, but I really enjoy it. And he has a series of he has a bunch of merchandise out, and so one of these, I love this shirt, Get After It, because it's kind of what we try to do every day in our lives here, is to get after it, whether it's to work out or get after it with relaxing or get after it with the work that we have to do. We're just going after it. So that's why I wanted to wear this shirt today. I was thinking about what I should talk about this week. And remember last week I talked about the need to relax, the need to unwind and get away from your work life for a while so you can rejuvenate yourself, but also so that you can be an example to the people you lead, that you as a leader are able to disconnect from work and to enjoy your time off with your friends and your family, and then get back into it. And that's a great example for the team. So that kind of led me to thinking about what I should talk about this week. And one of the things that I think I've always been passionate about is about in the area of meetings. As business people, we're inundated with meetings. And even in this COVID era, where a fair amount of people are still not back in the office physically, you're doing a bunch of Zoom meetings, which is a little bit different, but it's still a meeting. And one of the reasons I became passionate about meetings is that, in most of my career, whether it was police, CIA, or Microsoft, you're always going to some kind of a meeting. And especially at Microsoft, right? The day is just chock full of meetings. And I remember one day at attending a staff meeting that my boss at the time was leading, and sitting next to a colleague, one of my peers in the organization. We all had our laptops up, sitting around the conference room table, and I kind of just glanced at his screen, and he had the Outlook calendar up, and I'm telling you, every day, almost every hour is just another meeting. And I kind of looked at my calendar and I said, well, that's kind of the same as mine, right? And but one of the things I've told all of you is that my team and I were really good. You know, when I was running global security as the chief security officer, we were really good about reading books on productivity, books on leadership, of course. And as we started this journey as a leadership team, the people that work directly underneath me, one of the books that I first read was The 5 Dysfunctions of a Team by Patrick Lencioni. Many of you who are avid readers of leadership books know Patrick Lencioni. He has a company in San Francisco called The Table Group. He's written a series of books on leadership, but the books are really cool because they're told in a story format, more like a fable. And at the end of the book, they kind of tie in all the teaching points. Plus, there are also things that you go online and download that you can use as reference materials as a leader, if you're looking at a particular book. So we read The 5 Dysfunctions as a team, and I think a lot of, organizations, if they have gotten that book, have learned to dissect it and kind of figure out how to fix their teams if they're dysfunctional. So I started getting along reading more and more of Patrick Lencioni's books. And one of the ones that really stuck with me, even to this day, is called Death by Meeting. I thought it was a cool title, right? And as you read the book, again, these books are told in the style of a fable. There's usually a protagonist, a business person that is wrestling with some business issue. In this particular one, they're wrestling with the idea of meetings. That meetings tend to be onerous. Meetings a lot of times can have no beginning, middle, or end. They just kind of are aimless. There are no resolutions at the end of the meetings. There's no specific issue that has been solved. And so as you read through the book, the protagonist is able to figure out a way of making meetings more manageable and not so deadly. Hence, I think the title, Death by Meeting. So I read the book, and I had my team read the book. I realized that we were caught in the same trap, as well as I think a lot of folks in our company and probably a lot of other companies. A typical meeting is it's called by the boss, and there may or may not be an agenda. And we'll get back to that later. And the meetings are usually a conglomeration of a lot of different things. There's usually some kind of intro by the boss. Then there's usually an update segment where people are updated on, I don't know, what's going on the boss's plate and the higher ups in the C-suite. There's always the usual, let's go around the room and kind of give everyone an update on what you've been working on since the last meeting. And that's kind of it, right? Sometimes there are some conversations about a particular topic or an issue or a personnel issue or whatever, but that's usually it. And I think the premise of Lencioni's book was that in many cases, these meetings really don't accomplish a whole lot. I've been in meetings where even after we finish the agenda and maybe the meeting is set for 90 minutes and you finish everything by half an hour, you have to stay there for another half an hour because that's what was carved out, which is a complete waste of time, right? And so we read the book, we dissected the book, and we implemented it in my organization in global security. So let me walk you through, because I just told you about what typical meetings are like. So let me walk you through what this book, Death by Meeting, and I encourage you to get it. I don't know Lencioni from Adam. I'm just a big fan of his books, and I think you can learn a lot. So I would encourage you to get his book, as well as obviously get The Art of Ronin Leadership, right? Shameless plug. But so read the book, and the way you dissect it is that you don't have this mishmash of operational issues and strategic issues and updates. You kind of segment them out. So the way this particular program works is you have a weekly sync up at the beginning of the week with your team, where you kind of go over what each team member is doing that particular week. And that's just to get the week started off straight and get everybody on the same page. Now, we used to actually bring everybody together on our Microsoft campus to our global security office in my conference room, and we would do that. But, traffic is pretty bad on the Microsoft campus, and we realized that we're also wasting a lot of time just traveling to a particular building when we could do it virtually. So we eventually did it virtually. But the idea was on Monday mornings, about 9 o'clock, we'd get together as a leadership team. And I would tell my team, okay, these are the top issues that I'm dealing with this week, right? I may be working on a strategic issue. I may have a couple of speeches to give, or I got a budget meeting or whatever. And then each of my direct reports would go through their week quickly. This is a quick meeting. No more than an hour was baked in, but we usually got done by half an hour because it's really kind of high level. And it's also a way to ask if anybody needs any help on any particular issue. So kind of deconflicting at the same time. So that kind of sets the tone for the week. Right, and so you've got basically it's a tactical meeting, and it allows my team members to have exposure to what their fellow team members are up to that week, and are there things that they need to kind of work together and force multiply to get things done because each of them have a piece of this, or are they stepping on each other's toes and got to figure out who actually owns a particular project or what have you. But it keeps everything transparent and out in the open, and it's a great way to get the week started. And then we would do that weekly. That's tactical, completely tactical. As we're talking through that meeting, and we come up with issues that looks like it may need a little more deep dive. It's more in the area of a strategic issue than a tactical issue. An example would be, one of my direct reports might say, "Hey, look, we're working with our subsidiary in Hyderabad or Bangalore, and we're looking to, put an investigator there or some kind of executive protection presence or what have you there." And then as you go around the room, somebody else is saying, "Hey, we're looking to also put some assets into India as well." Well, that becomes a broader issue because now we're talking about resources that I, as the leader, need to kind of weigh and decide what takes priority. Who needs the bodies the most. That also goes into how many bodies I could possibly get from my boss, because obviously headcount is not infinite, as those of you who work in enterprises know. So you have to be kind of conscious of that. And also, what are the actual priorities and needs of our subsidiary? It's one thing if we want to put boots on the ground somewhere, but I would always be cognizant of the fact that what does the subsidiary need? Have we asked them? Have we talked to the GM, the presidents, the vice presidents, our stakeholders out there in the field as to what resources from security they really need and how they prioritize it? So that in itself, what I just talked about in the last, minute, is a greater conversation. So what we would do is we take that and we show that for a strategic discussion. And it's not just the tactical meetings, but throughout the month, as these issues would come up, we would kind of segment them, and just, my business manager would keep track of these strategic issues. And then once a month, again, going back to the death by meeting model, we would have a strategy meeting. And that meeting would be a lot longer. I mean, we bake in about 3 hours. Usually we go at least 2, sometimes we go 3. And the idea there is to stay away from the tactical. You've already dealt with that at the beginning of the week. So this once a month meeting is strictly Strictly strategic. Say that 3 times, right? And this is where we can really sit down and deep dive into these kinds of issues. And I really loved it, and I think my team loved it as we got rolling along with this particular model of meetings. Because no more was it about let's just update everybody else and make it a mishmash. Now we can actually spend quality time doing a deep dive on the biggest strategic issues that were facing us that particular month, for instance, or the next few months or that quarter or what have you. And it was good debate and discussion. There were obviously, going back to the example I gave, if I have 2 or 3 of my direct reports, all with, really great arguments as to why they need those bodies in India, and they're all legitimate, right? Then we have the discussion of, have we talked to India? Do we actually have the information from our regional security people out there, their input as to, okay, what is it that the bosses there in India want? Do they want a crisis management person there as opposed to investigator, or vice versa? What is it do they actually need out there? Do they need another regional person out there? And so by having those discussions, we can cover all of our bases, make sure that we have all the input that we need in order to make a reasonable decision about, okay, all of you have legitimate reasons for putting your particular organization's boots on the ground. But from a prioritization standpoint, based on what the field wants and how much headcount I can get, then we can prioritize in a business manner and actually make the right decision. But those don't happen in meetings that are just a mishmash of everything. And so we found ourselves in a very good rhythm as we got rolling along. And we could take care of the tactical once a week, and we make sure we deconflict and everybody's connected, right? And again, we go back to what I call in the book strategic integration. And for those of you who have read the book, you know what I'm talking about. Those of you who haven't, strategic integration is actually a term I came up with. And that just basically means that every vertical that you have in your organization, not only should they be connecting within that organization, which can be hard at times, but they need to be connecting with other organizations within my greater organization to integrate strategically. If you're going to need resources in a particular part of the world, have you coordinated with your teammates? Have you coordinated with your fellow direct reports as to, what do you need from them? Or if you know that they're looking for the same thing, have you had conversations with them at your level as to what should take primacy? So strategic integration was certainly a big impetus for doing these once a month strategic meetings. And I guess you could call the weekly meetings a sort of tactical integration, if it were. We never termed it like that, but that's probably what it was. What we found out in the end is that we had a more engaged group of individuals at meetings. We had an agenda. Going back to that, I mentioned that earlier. Meetings that don't have agendas are really meaningless, as far as I'm concerned. There has to be an agenda. There has to be some beginning, middle, end, and so if you don't have an agenda, then you're not really, as a leader, conducting a proper meeting. The other thing is that you should learn to be flexible when you're doing your meetings. So go back to my example. I've had times in my career where a meeting was scheduled for 90 minutes. I went through the agenda and we were over in 45 minutes or maybe an hour. And yet, whoever the boss was at the time, it just insisted that we all stay the 90 minutes. Well, you just wasted everybody's time for half an hour when we could have been back in the office looking at email or doing something productive, right? Meetings are there to inform, but also to make decisions and then to move on. everybody at that meeting is busy and has a lot of things to do. And so using the model that we implemented, we had really engaged people, and if we were done with the meeting before the allotted time, I cut it down and said, okay, everybody go back to work. We're done. Give them back their time. As a leader, give them back their time. Their time is precious. Your time is precious. So don't extend a meeting beyond that which you need to, right? If you're done with the agenda, then you're done with the agenda. So that's kind of like the nuts and bolts of conducting meetings. The flip side of that is, and going back to looking at my colleagues, kind of screen and then looking at mine, I had to learn to be meaningful about what meetings I want to take. Too often in corporate America, and probably government too, is that you're invited to a meeting. It ends up on your calendar and you accept it. And pretty soon your Outlook or whatever, your iCalendar, or whatever you use is just full of meetings. So one of the things I talked about in the book is that as a leader, you need to carve out time to be strategic, to actually just think, and not just be going from meeting to meeting to meeting to meeting. Because one of the things I thought about when I saw my colleague's screen and my screen was like, and this was kind of earlier on in my tenure at Microsoft, was like, yeah, I really don't have a lot of time. And as a leader, you need time to strategize. So after a while, I became, and my team did the same thing, and I think it permeated through our organizations. We became really rigorous about taking a look at what meetings we actually needed to be at. Just because you're invited to a meeting doesn't mean you have to go to that meeting. If you're not a decision maker, if you really have nothing to lend to the meeting, but it's because, in my case, we wanted the chief security officer at Microsoft there, well, then you should weigh whether or not you should go. And after a period of time, getting really rigorous, got really good at saying no. And I worked a lot with Samantha, who was my business manager at the time, and we'd go over our rhythm of business weekly and kind of look at, do I need to go to this meeting? Do I not need to go to this meeting? And she was actually a good one to bounce things off of, because she could say, hey, boss, you probably don't really need to go there, because what are you going to do there other than sit? And that's what happens, I think, too often in corporate and government, where you're invited to a meeting, but you really have nothing to contribute. I would take those meetings, just respectfully decline and say, I've got other priorities. Because the goal for you as leaders, and I don't care if you're running a global organization or if you're an individual contributor at the lower end of the organization in terms of rank or tenure or what have you. One of the philosophies I always had was that whether it's me or whether it's somebody down the chain of command, everyone has the ability to be strategic. I and my leadership team did not have the market cornered on strategy. Now, we were paid to be strategic and to drive the organization. But I always contended that whoever it is in the organization, if they had the time to think, I don't care if it's 15 minutes, half an hour, what have you, they might come up with that next big idea and run it up the flagpole. And it's like, hey, we hadn't thought about that. Maybe we should check that out and try it. But you got to manage your calendar. So got to the point where I could carve out a period of time a week. Usually for me, it was Friday afternoons. So unless it was a crisis or my boss said we need to meet, usually I would try to hold out the last few hours of Friday afternoon to be strategic and just think about strategy. But that can't be done if I'm running around meeting after meeting after meeting. So be rigorous with the meetings that you attend, right? So, and you have to be really honest with yourself that, do I really need to attend this meeting? What's the ROI for me to attend this meeting? If I can lend something to a conversation from the aspect of my organization and lend some expertise that whoever's calling the meeting doesn't have, that's one thing. But if it's just merely kind of butts and seats, you're wasting your time. So be rigorous about the meetings that you take And you'll find as meetings start falling off your calendar, you'll find that time to be strategic. And that's a big part of this whole kind of death by meeting and meeting protocols that we've been talking about, is if you can manage, and that's a whole different subject, manage your calendar. That's a whole different productivity subject, which we might get into at some other time. In fact, I have a good friend of mine who taught us productivity. I think I'm going to bring her on as a podcast guest. But at the end of the day, being able to manage your meetings efficiently and carve out time to do the operational piece once a week, and then to do that strategic meeting 2, 3, 4 hours, however much you guys in your organization need it. And then being rigorous about only going to the meetings that you need to attend, you'll find yourself being able to carve out a half an hour here, an hour here during the week where you can actually sit down as leaders and think. And going back to what we talked about last week, where that whole thing about relaxation is not only good for you, but it's an example to your team, right? That your team, they're looking at you all the time, and if they see that even on vacation, you're always on the email and you're always sending stuff and you're never relaxed, well, they're going to emulate you. Well, it's kind of the same thing here. I mean, if you're bouncing around from meeting to meeting and you're really not carving out time to be strategic, chances are they're going to follow that example too. One of the things I think about when it comes to people who go to constant meetings all the time. Again, I'm not saying meetings that you necessarily always you need to attend. I'm just saying they're going to meetings. It's kind of like, the analogy is what I've heard before. It's kind of like, you got a little checklist, right, of things you got to do at work. They might not be the most important or strategic things, but you got a checklist. And you get through that checklist at the end of the day, hey, I've accomplished everything on that checklist. However, you never got to the really hard things that you really needed to tackle. You never got to any of the strategic issues that are still lying on your plate, but you got the checklist done. I think a lot of people enjoy, I don't know if they enjoy it, but going to meeting after meeting after meeting after meeting at the end of an 8, 9, 10 hour day is like, wow, I've had a lot of activity. But what's the ROI for that activity, right? So you always need to be thinking as a leader that what's the ROI for anything that I engage in? ROI for my organization and my team first, but also ROI for me. Am I running around with like a chicken with his head cut off and then finding out I never have time to think about a strategic plan for the next quarter or the next year, and tired, I'm exhausted. And if you sit back and reflect, I probably, in a lot of the meetings I went to, really didn't lend a whole lot to it, but I was there because I was invited. So these are the things that I think you should be thinking about when it comes to meetings. I mean, meetings are obviously a central part of any enterprise. We have to meet, we have to discuss issues, we have to make decisions. The problem, like anything else, is that there tends to be too many meetings. I actually had, there was a VP at Microsoft, and like all, good leaders, you should be meeting with your direct reports on a regular basis. I would meet with each of my direct reports, initially it was for an hour, once a month. But then over a period of time I realized it didn't need a whole hour, it needed just half an hour. But I was talking to this one VP one time, and he actually whittled his direct reports meeting to 15 minutes. Now, that's pushing it, but his point was, I know what my team is doing, so when I'm meeting with them, I want them to be crisp and succinct as to what they want to bring on my table. So his direct reports meetings were 15 minutes. And I thought that was actually very admirable. I never went there. I kept it at half an hour. Plus I carved out every quarter a sort of a career development meeting with members of my team. And that worked for me. You got to find what works for you. But I tell you what, getting that other half an hour back, just gave me some more time to do other stuff, right? So that's kind of the constant equation that you're going to be wrestling with. So that is kind of what I'm thinking about today. Meetings are important in the business world, but the meetings that you have under your control, where it's your decision, it's your discretion whether or not you go to that meeting, you own that, right? And so I'm just asking you to be thoughtful and mindful about meetings. Discard the ones you really don't need to go to, and then figure out a way. It doesn't have to be exactly how I described it based on Lencioni's book, but figure out a way to separate the operational from the strategic, however way you want to slice it, right? So that you can keep everybody coordinated at the beginning of the week and make sure that nobody's stepping on each other's toes, or you can force multiply when you need to. Somebody needs help. Oh, I've got a resource to help you out. Boom, go work on it. And then carve out that time for strategy, and so that you can really do a lot of deep dives. And I think if you are mindful about that, not only will you find meetings more enjoyable because you're actually contributing something to it, and you're engaged as opposed to sitting and taking notes, but you'll also find that you're able to coordinate better within your team as well as outside of your team, and that whole strategic integration piece, right? And over a period of time, doesn't happen overnight, as you find things falling off your calendar, you'll be able to find those slots during the week, or that slot during the week where, okay, it's half an hour, or it's an hour, or it's 2 hours. It's whatever you can carve out where you can sit there and think, because I think that's really important. You have to have thinking time, right? Where you can think about your business, and you can think about how the business is going. What obstacles do we face ahead of us, and how do I ready myself and my team to tackle whatever is coming up ahead? What resources am I going to need? What headcount? How much headcount am I going to need to have? What are the things I need to prep my boss about? All those kinds of things only happen when you're able to think strategically about your business. So that's what I have for you today. I get passionate about meetings because, as with you, I guarantee you've been in enough meetings where you're wondering, why am I here? Or this meeting is going on forever, or there's always, like, when the meeting's over and somebody always wants to talk, and so you're looking at the clock and, someone else has got to chime in on something that may or may not be pertinent, but they're just talking. And so then it just keeps going on and on. So, be cognizant of as you're holding a meeting, when you are in charge of running a meeting, just be cognizant of the time constraints on your direct reports, your troops, and make sure that, surely cover everything you need to cover. But when you're done, boom, end it, cut them loose, let them go have a great day. So that's what I have for you this week. And I'd really like to hear what you have to say about this whole idea of meetings, and obviously give us your feedback. And again, remember, subscribe to the podcast. As I said at the beginning of the podcast, we're on a lot of different platforms now. You can find us, YouTube, Apple, Spotify, Google. And also on my website, MikeHowardAuthor.com. You can certainly find the podcast all listed there, as well as where you can buy the book, The Art of Ronin Leadership. So hit that subscribe button. So until next week, I wish you a really great week of great leadership, great productivity, great relaxation, and also at the end of the week that you're able to look back and reflect and say, this was a really great week. We got a lot of things accomplished in my organization. I was able to take time for myself, and I think I'm taking care of my troops very well. So if you can end the week like that, you indeed have had a great week. So until next week, we'll talk to you later. This is Mike Howard, the Art of Ronin Leadership podcast. I'm out.